No one expected it inside the quiet of Windsor Castle. Princess Anne handed King Charles a sealed letter, Queen Elizabeth's final private decree. As Anne read the words aloud, Charles, his eyes filled with tears. It wasn't about your diplomacy. It was personal. The late Queen had made a bold, binding choice. Catherine was to carry the monarchy's emotional legacy forward, not Camilla, not tradition, but the woman the Queen quietly watched, trusted, and named. What followed shattered palace silence, reshaped royal roles, and sparked a future no one saw coming. All because of one final command from the Queen herself, and delivers the Queen's hidden message. It began with a quiet knock on the King's private study door. Princess Anne didn't need guards or fanfare. She stepped in with purpose, her face calm, her voice low, but the urgency unmistakable. Charles looked up, sensing instantly this wasn't a routine visit, and didn't waste time. It's about her, and it's time you knew. The Queen's only daughter had kept a secret, not out of disloyalty, but out of solemn duty. It was a personal instruction, not ceremonial, not bureaucratic, a final decree from Queen Elizabeth herself, written in her final weeks, locked away and trusted. And alone. Now, with the monarchy shifting and Camilla, his camp growing louder behind palace doors, and knew it was time to act. She pulled a velvet envelope from her coat, no crest, just the Queen's personal handwriting on the seal. Inside, a letter penned in the Queen's final days, bearing the full authority of a monarch, but written in the voice of a mother and a legacy maker. As Anne read it aloud, Charles sat still. At first no reaction, then as the words unfolded, her precise phrasing, her undeniable clarity, his eyes filled with tears. He turned his face slightly, but not in time to hide it. She named her, he whispered, and nodded. Yes, Catherine. The room fell into stunned silence. The Queen's words were more than a gesture. They were a direct, permanent command, a confirmation of something the public had long suspected, but the family had never dared say out loud. Catherine was the one chosen to carry the monarchy's emotional crown. The document referred to her as the embodiment of quiet strength and requested that she be recognized not just in public roles but within the inner royal structure. It invoked Diane, his legacy, citing Catherine's grace under pressure and natural alignment with the people's spirit. Charles, his hands trembled slightly as he took the letter himself, reading it again. His lips pressed together, his voice strained, and remained steady, but even her eyes had glossed over. It's what she wanted, she said simply, and we will honor it. Nearby courtiers stood frozen. They had expected routine discussion, not a royal reckoning. Catherine wasn't just the Princess of Wales anymore. She had been chosen, blessed, and formally endorsed by the Queen herself, and Charles, through tears and shock, now had to reckon with that truth. What the decree actually says. The Queen's letter was short, but every word carried weight. Dated just 2 weeks before her passing and signed in her own hand, it began not with protocol, but with legacy. She spoke first of duty, her reign, her hope for continuity, and the burden of service she had carried. But then her tone shifted. It became intimate, almost maternal. She named Catherine directly, no ambiguity. She will carry forward what I cannot, what Diana began, the grace, the restraint, the quiet resolve. She has earned the people's love. She has earned my trust. The decree went further than anyone expected. Catherine was designated custodian of several royal heirlooms, including items not yet in her possession, tiaras, brooches, and symbolic regalia meant to represent continuity between monarchs. Among them were Diana's lesser-known favorites, as well as jewels from Queen Elizabeth's own private collection, pieces passed from mother to daughter, not queen to consort. More shocking still was the expanded responsibility clause. Catherine was not just to inherit jewelry or titles, she was to assume the spiritual role of queen and waiting. Opposition unofficial in name, but institutional in importance. A silent promise that the monarchy would one day rest in her hands. This wasn't about skipping Camilla, it was about establishing Catherine as the permanent face of the future, one who would represent both Elizabeth's and Diana's legacies in one woman. The language was absolute. This decision is to be honored in perpetuity, without amendment, regardless of future title or rank. Even Anne, who had read it before, seemed renewed by the power of the words. She looked at Charles and said, "This is more than tradition. This is the crown choosing its voice." For the palace it was a bombshell. Catherine's elevation wasn't just anticipated, it was locked in, bound by the words of a sovereign whose reign had lasted 70 years, a queen whose quiet decisions always shaped history, and with one document that history had shifted again. Because now the world knew Catherine hadn't just married into royalty, she had been anointed to lead it. And for Charles, now holding the letter with trembling fingers, the question wasn't whether to honor it, it was how soon he'd be ready to step aside. Charles's emotional response. He had read thousands of official documents in his lifetime, but this one made his hands tremble. As King Charles sat with Queen Elizabeth's final letter in his lap, the full weight of it hit him, not just as a monarch but as a son. Her words, delicate but commanding, pierced through every layer of royal protocol. They were final, unshakable, and they centered on Catherine. Tears welled in his eyes. For a man trained to suppress emotion, this moment shattered his restraint. His lower lip quivered, his eyes bloodshot and glistening, locked on the final sentence. Let her carry the light. He pressed his hand to his mouth. A long silence fell over the room. Even the courtiers stood still, heads lowered, unsure whether to intervene or simply witness, and remained quiet but steady beside him. She understood more than anyone that this was a moment not of power, but of surrender. Charles wasn't losing authority, he was gaining clarity. He had spent years defending Camilla's right to be by his side, but this wasn't about Camilla, this was about what the crown needed next, and in his mother's eyes that answer had been made crystal clear. Catherine. The emotions swirling and him weren't just grief, they were conflict, guilt, relief, gratitude. He had watched Catherine grow from a shy university sweetheart into the mother of the future king. He had admired her poise, her work ethic, her ability to charm nations without ever raising her voice. But now, for the first time, he saw her the way his mother had seen her, not just as William's wife, but as the next true Queen of England. His voice cracked as he finally spoke. She knew, he said softly. She knew before any of us. A moment later, he rose slowly, still holding the letter, and turned to face the nearby advisors who had gathered after N's call. Their faces were pale, their expressions unreadable. This is not to be debated, he said, his voice firmer now. The Queen's will shall be followed. And just like that, the entire atmosphere shifted. Thrill had not asked for this honor. But now, with the Queen's blessing etched in ink and carried in tears, she would inherit far more than duty. She would inherit destiny. Catherine's new royal role emerges. Catherine had no idea what was coming that morning. She was reviewing plans for a children's hospital visit, her schedule tight, her mood focused, the same way she approached every day in royal service. Then came the call. It wasn't from Charles, it wasn't from William. It was from Princess Anne. That had never been close in the traditional sense and was stoic, hardened by decades of protocol. But that day and tone was different. It was almost gentle. You might want to come to Windsor, she said. There's something you need to hear for yourself. By the time Catherine arrived, the mood was still wrong. She entered the drawing room to find Charles quiet, emotional, and handed her the Queen's letter. She read it once, then again. Her hand flew to her mouth. For all the public praise she had received over the years, the magazine covers, the glowing articles, the admiration, nothing compared to this. She saw me, Catherine asked softly, and simply nodded, and it was true. Queen Elizabeth hadn't just noticed her, she had studied her, watched her, trusted her. In the letter, Elizabeth detailed how Catherine had brought stability, compassion, and a modern dignity to the role of royal wife and mother. She praised her understanding of tradition or subtle strength, and the way she carried Diane, his legacy, without ever trying to become her. It wasn't just a blessing, it was a mandate. And from that moment, everything began to change. Catherine's role shifted overnight. Behind the scenes, new titles were discussed, royal events were rearranged, advisors began re-evaluating which appearances should include her and which ones she should lead for the public. It began as a whisper, then photos appeared. Catherine standing closer to Charles, seated more prominently during formal engagements, speaking in ways that felt more regal. She looks different now, one reporter noted, not just royal risen. But it wasn't arrogance, it was responsibility. She didn't gloat, she didn't retreat. She stepped forward the way Elizabeth had once done after her own unexpected rise. Even Camilla, once the dominant royal consort, began fading slightly into the background, not by force but by gravity. The spotlight no longer followed her. It followed Catherine, and the public felt it. Polls surged in her favor, trust ratings climbed, news outlets described a monarchy modernizing through elegance. The Queen's final decree had done more than shift jewelry and titles, it had shifted the very center of royal power. Catherine wasn't just part of the monarchy's future, she had become its anchor and motivations behind the revelation. Princess, and has always been a figure of discipline, sharp, reserved, and fiercely loyal to the crown. She never chased public attention, she never needed applause, but when it came to protecting her mother's legacy, she was immovable and had kept the Queen's letter private for months, not because she doubted its importance or because she was waiting for the right moment, when emotion wouldn't cloud duty and the monarchy's future truly needed clarity. That moment had arrived. With palace whispers growing louder, Camilla, his camp gaining momentum, and the lines of influence beginning to blur, and knew something had to be said. Queen Elizabeth's final decree couldn't be left tucked away in a drawer. It wasn't just a private thought, it was a commander vision. A final voice from the throne. Sources say indecision shocked even senior court hears. Many had assumed she'd remain neutral, the Queen's daughter, yes, but not a player in the power game. But they had underestimated her resolve. She hadn't spent decades walking 3 steps behind kings and queens just to watch the crown shift off course. Now, and didn't deliver the decree to cause drama, she delivered it to restore direction. And in doing so, she made her own position crystal clear. Whatever power plays were brewing inside palace walls, legacy was not negotiable. Not when it came to Elizabeth, and not when it came to Catherine. As stepped away from the fire she had just lit, she left behind a monarchy forever altered, one built on tradition, but now leaning toward transformation. And as rules began shifting rapidly around her, it became clear this wasn't just Catherine's rise, it was Anne's defining moment as the crown's protector. Palace factions react and rearrange. The fallout inside Buckingham Palace was immediate and seismic as a word of Queen Elizabeth's decree spread. The once stable inner circle of royal power began to crack. What had been whispers turned into closed-door meetings. Alliances were tested, and behind polished walls, the crown quietly began to rearrange itself. Camilla, his camp, was stunned. Many believed she had firmly secured her place beside Charles, her title or influence, her ceremonial weight. But this decree changed everything. It didn't remove her, it did redefine the future. Suddenly Camille, his reign as queen, fell borrowed. One royal advisor reportedly walked out of a meeting shaking their head, mumbling, "We didn't see this coming." Others tried to spin it as symbolic, but they knew better. This wasn't a gesture. This was structure. This was law. Meanwhile, William and Catherine's closest aides moved quickly, not with arrogance but preparation. Catherine wouldn't ask for attention, but she had to be positioned correctly. Scheduling teams began reassessing her visibility. Her name appeared first in briefing notes. Seating charts changed, speaking slots at upcoming engagements were reevaluated, and everywhere the signs were subtle but undeniable. Catherine was no longer just the Princess of Wales. She was now the Queen in waiting. By decree, across the palace, roles began to shift around her, not dramatically, not loudly, but with the quiet inevitability of a tide changing course. And with each passing day, it was becoming more clear. The monarchy was being rebalanced, and everyone knew who stood at its center now. Public and media uproar. The moment the Queen's final decree was leaked, the media lit up like wildfire. Tabloid front pages screamed king and tears. Queen Elizabeth chose Catherine, the crown's final command. It didn't take long before every major outlet from London to New York was dissecting the same question: why Catherine, and why now? Public response was immediate and deeply emotional. Social media exploded with support. Twitter threads praised Queen Elizabeth's foresight. Instagram reels replayed moments of Catherine wearing Diana's jewels with captions like "The Queen saw what we all saw," and TikTok users flooded the app with side-by-side comparisons of Diana, and Catherine their grace, their empathy, their quiet power in every corner of the internet. One message dominated: the crown is in the right hands. Royal commentators didn't hold back either. On primetime television, analysts called the moment the most significant royal pivot since Diana's passing. Others labeled it a course correction for the monarchy, one that finally aligned with public sentiment. For years many had admired Catherine's composure or warmth or steady service, but now with the Queen's decree made public it felt official, it felt earned. This was a legacy moment. DP feed fever call my mate, one BBC historian said, not just for Catherine but for the institution itself. While the ripple effects of this news only widened, Camilla, who had worked hard to reshape her image and gain the public's tolerance, suddenly found herself overshadowed once more. Though not formally displaced, she was being quietly repositioned in the eyes of many. She was now the placeholder, not the future, and the public wasn't subtle about it. Polls conducted in the week following the announcement showed a sharp surge in support for Catherine, with nearly 82% of Britons saying she best represented the monarchy's future. In contrast, only 34% supported Camilla remaining in a leading role for the next generation. Main's editorials, even international broadcasts, echoed one central truth: the Queen may be gone, but her word still rules. For the royal family, the message was clear. This wasn't a PR bum. This was a public reckoning. And with so many eyes watching, Catherine had a choice: retreat from the spotlight or step fully into it. Catherine's poised response, while headlines exploded and palace phones rang non-stop, Catherine remained exactly as the Queen had described her: graceful, composed, unshaken. She didn't host a press conference. She didn't issue a statement. He simply continued with her royal schedule, but with a different way to her steps, a deeper meaning behind every appearance. At her next public event, a children's hospice in the Midlands, she arrived wearing a soft cream coat, Diana's sapphire earrings glinting beneath her hair. She smiled, held hands, knelt to speak to young patients, and delivered a short speech about resilience and legacy. There was no mention of the decree, no reference to the shift, but it was there in the way she carried herself, in the way the cameras lingered just a little longer, in the way the crowd greeted her, not with surprise but with reverence. She walked in like a queen, one onlooker told reporters, but not like someone who wanted the crown, like someone who already earned it. Her team made deliberate choices in the days that followed. She visited charities favored by Queen Elizabeth, gave quiet interviews to family-focused publications, and prioritized appearances that emphasized service over status. Even her wardrobe began to shift: more structured coach, legacy brooches, and symbolic colors tied to the late Queen's signature looks. Every element felt intentional, thoughtful, a quiet nod to continuity. Behind closed doors, Catherine took on more planning meetings than usual. She met with senior aides to discuss long-term initiatives, upcoming tours, and her new role as the monarchy's emotional centerpiece. Insiders say she remained calm throughout, but determined. Her message was clear: if she was going to rise, she would do it her way, with dignity, with meaning, and with Elizabeth's final blessing as her guide. While some in the palace may have whispered or winced at the shift, the public didn't hesitate. The Queen's chosen one wasn't just stepping up, she was leading. What's at stake for the monarchy? The Queen's final decree didn't just change Catherine's role, it redefined the monarchy's direction. In an institution built on tradition, moments like this are rare, but when they come, they leave a mark that lasts for generations. And this one came from the only figure whose words still echoes with unmatched authority: Queen Elizabeth II. At the heart of it all lies a single irreplaceable symbol: Princess Diana's legacy. By naming Catherine as the one to carry it forward, Elizabeth wasn't just making a sentimental choice. She was making a strategic one. She knew the monarchy could no longer rely on protocol alone. It needed heart, humanity, familiarity with the people, and Catherine had shown time and again that she could connect where others couldn't. But the timing of the decree also revealed yield more than sentiment. It was a recognition of reality. King Charles, his health, long rumored to be fragile, has required increasing adjustments to his schedule. Sources say he's begun quietly preparing for a future where others take the reins, not just temporarily or permanently, And while Camilla continues in her role beside him, or influence is being delicately reshaped, Princess Anne meanwhile has emerged as the palace's stabilizing force, loyal to the crown, loyal to her mother's memory, and unafraid to say what others won't. Her act of revealing the decree wasn't rebellion, it was preservation of Elizabeth's intent and of the monarchy's credibility. The stakes now go beyond heirlooms and appearances. This is about who shapes the soul of the modern monarchy, and Catherine, with her quiet discipline and the public's overwhelming support, has become the anchor not just for William and their children, but for the entire royal institution. Because what's really at stake now is trust. The Queen gave hers and the people followed. Speculative outcome and forward plot. It's not official yet, but all signs point to one inevitable outcome. Catherine will be crowned Queen Consort, with Queen Elizabeth's blessing etched into every step of that journey, not just as a formality, but as a fulfillment of the late Queen's final vision. Camilla, though still respected inside palace walls, is gradually stepping into a more subdued role, a supporter of the institution, not its face. There are whispers she may scale back engagements within the year. If confirmed, it would leave room for Catherine to assume more prominent ceremonial responsibilities, not in name, but in practice. King Cha,